Oh, this is going to be great.
Hey, what are you doing there?
Oh, I'm getting ready to work on a couple videos that are going to be kind of a retrospective on Wyrmspan. The first one is I'm going to be interviewing Connie.
Wait, why are you interviewing Connie?
What do you mean? What do you mean? Why? She designed Wyrmspan.
What do you mean Connie designed Wyrmspan and I didn't get her autograph this entire time?
We're going to video chat and do an interview.
Why would you have to do a video chat to interview her when she lives here?
Yeah, I'm right here. I could do the interview anytime.
Not our Connie, Connie Vogelmann, the designer of Wyrmspan and Apiary.
I would still do an interview with you if you want.
Yeah, I bet you would. Well, we'll have to revisit that another time. Anyway. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Board Game Animal. I'm Justin, and we are treated to have Connie with us today, designer of Apiary and Wyrmspan, and we're going to have a nice little chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. So, to get things started, I wanted to kick it off by saying that this is long overdue. I had wanted to reach out to you and have this conversation a ways back with Wyrmspan, and as time went on, I said I'm going to wait, and then all of a sudden it's 2025, and we're putting together our best of 2024 stuff. Wyrmspan is, of course, a part of that. And then there's also the Finspan announcement. And there just seems to be a lot going on in that space. I saw a particular thread of yours on Blue Sky that I thought hit home very well. And I wanted to kind of talk about that first, maybe get some of the drama stuff out of the way, but I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so tough. I mean, there's something about Stonemaier games in particular that seem to get, both the supporters, obviously, and as I said, the folks who are really, really excited about the games, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's why we're in the hobby. That's why we're making games. But then you also get the detractors too.
Mhm.
And, I said this in the Blue Sky thread, but that I didn't really feel comfortable commenting at all on Wyrmspan because I was obviously so closely involved with it that, I didn't want to be the designer being like, don't worry, I worked really hard on it. But, since obviously I've kind of been through the process and then seeing it now in Finspan, I felt a little bit more able to speak up and just sort of say like, look, remember, there's a human element of this too. I mean,
Mhm.
the designers who were working on Finspan worked really hard for a really long time on it. Stonemaier could have just reskinned Wingspan and just
Yeah.
published several different versions with the exact same game, not gone through the whole rigmarole of designing a whole new game. And they didn't do that. They didn't want to. I mean, they wanted to basically keep creating content for the people who loved Wingspan. And so they went out and made these whole two separate games. I mean, Wyrmspan being a little bit heavier, Finspan being a little bit lighter. And so it's really frustrating to see some of that vitriol coming from people. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of games released every single year, and most games are not really targeted at any particular person. And I think for me, I can't imagine going onto a website or onto a games page and typing an angry screed about a game that I'm not interested in. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, and so I just, so I just wanted to sort of speak out a little bit of that and remind people that there really is a human element, and that even if you have a game that's based off of a popular system, there's still literally years of work that go into it.
Absolutely. And there's a couple points to that hit me with Wyrmspan, and now it hit me again with Finspan, and it all came back. And I mean, I'm just a fan, and I'm seeing this happen, and it's hitting me emotionally. And I said, I can't imagine the people behind the scenes. That there are so many people working hard on this. I think you can dilute it down, right? You could even look at one card in Wyrmspan and look at the artwork and say, wow, what effort it took to make that one card. What amazing work. Same with Finspan. And to just kind of write it off like you
Oh,
see happen,
yep.
it 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 irritates me. I don't want to sound like a broken record because I did say this with Jamie as well. But I think my number one pet peeve is going out of your way to leave a negative review or a one-star review when you haven't played the game.
Yep.
Obviously, not every game is for everyone. Everyone has varying tastes. But to me, if you haven't played the game, that's kind of the end of the discussion.
Right, right. Well, and again, I don't think you can overstate too how much Wingspan has really done for the hobby. I mean, in terms
Yeah.
of just getting in, literally, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who may never have played games before. And so I think, anything that's going to be targeting that sort of same audience, or maybe even easier. I mean, helping some of these people get their kids into the game because there's less language dependency
Hmm.
in Finspan, it just seems like such a good thing for the hobby that it's sort of sad that the announcement, again, as much as it has been very, very positive and a lot of people have really, really liked it, that it's sort of sad that there's this kind of tinge, this negativity as well.
Yeah, I think you use the phrase small but vocal minority because
Yeah.
it
Yep.
is very small in the grand scheme of
Oh
things,
yeah.
but it's loud and it stings.
Yep.
I think one of my the things I found funniest, not to, you know, not that it's funny, but one of the comments I saw that was a negative comment about Finspan was no one asked for this. And I stared at it for a moment and I said to myself, hold on. And I look over at my shelf of games and I said, I didn't ask for any of these.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yep.
I wasn't sitting there a few years ago and saying, I need a game about birds that I'm going to love. It's the hobby is filled with games that surprise us constantly, so I just thought that was a funny comment.
Yep. Well, and I think it's extra funny too because it's actually not true. That the reason that Stonemaier did both Wyrmspan and Finspan was specifically because those were two of the most requested, types
Mhm.
of animals. People wanted a strict, retheme, and obviously it turned into something new. But I think it's funny that a lot of people really did ask for it.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the comment is self-destructive in two ways,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's really funny. And actually, with Wyrmspan, what I thought was especially funny from the start was I had heard, or seen feedback in the hobby in the zeitgeist. It's like, oh, Wingspan, nobody cares about birds because we're gamers, whatever that means.
Yep. Yep.
And it's like, what do gamers like? Dragons. Okay.
Yep.
Wormspan comes out and then they say, why'd you take away the bird theme? And I'm like, it's like make up your mind. That's how I feel about that.
Well, of course. And I think it just what I just keep coming back to, as I sort of said before, is just the more people are in the hobby, the more, people, the more publishers, the more designers, I think the hobby is going to be a much better place. And so
Hmm.
anything that kind of reaches out to those different people and that doesn't sort of just hit your kind of stereotypical, gamer with your beige Euros. And trust me, I love my beige Euros, but
Hmm.
anything that sort of reaches beyond that seems like a net positive for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. So jumping outside of the drama, because ultimately what that boils down to, I think you put it very succinctly nicely. Be kind. That's what it comes down to. People are, I'll say, silly, to put it nicely.
That's a nice way to
Um,
put it.
yes, yes, and I'll just stop there because I could go on. But to start spinning it a little bit positive, you had started that blue sky thread by saying it was a roller coaster because obviously the roller coaster has highs as well.
Yep.
One of the questions I want to ask, kind of a compound question, is when you were developing Wyrmspan, I'm sure there was something or maybe more than one thing that you were excited to see people experience and play and see what they thought of it. And now you're looking back almost a year later now. Was it was the response to some of the things you were hoping to see people get excited about what they did get excited about, or did people surprise you with what they liked?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that was the most fun for me, well, there were actually two things. And one were the hatchlings. These are the baby dragons that you sort of charge up. You want to activate them 3 times and then you get a bonus. And the other one was the Dragon Guild. And I think the hatchlings in particular went through a lot of ups and downs, in the sense that, when I was um, designing the game, one of the things that I struggled with the most with the hatchlings is that everyone kind of consistently thought they were overcosted. And I'm like, I promise you they're not. I swear they're not. And so I went through so many rounds of playtesting with the blind playtesters where I was like, I know that everyone is saying that they're overcosted. I have to knock them down a little bit, but I want to keep them because like I know the math, I know how they're used in the game. And then a couple of the very first reviews that came out for Wyrmspan were like, man, I just don't understand these hatchlings. They're too expensive. There's no way they're ever like I don't know what they were thinking. And so I was like, oh no, did I get it wrong? And then now that the game has been out a little bit and people have played a few more times, I actually think the hatchlings are in a really good spot. Like they're definitely strong, but they're
Mm.
hard enough to use, and because they often use that milk resource, it's a little bit of kind of its own thing. I think it actually has worked out really well. So that's one of these things that like went up and down, like both in the design and then after the release of Wyrmspan.
That's really cool. That's interesting. And for the record, I love the hatchling element. I am bad at using them. If you could ask anyone in my game group. I'm not a play to win person anyway.
Yep.
I don't have the highest win percentage. I just love the experience. But yeah, no, that's that the hatchlings is a really interesting element. I liked that. I liked the sense of, you know, the different utilization of the milk and the egg, and just the whole thing I thought was an interesting twist that you didn't see in Wingspan,
Yep.
like a lot of the mechanisms.
Well, and I think it really let Clementine, the artist, really have so much fun with some of the hatchlings too. I mean, the art on all of the dragons is absolutely amazing, but I think the hatchlings in particular, she just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I would struggle to pick a favorite. I was thinking about that, and I'm sorry, I don't have one particular because there are so many interesting ones. I was going to ask you if there were plushes or merch or something made. Do you know one off the top of your head you'd want to see?
Oh, well, so I actually have a couple of dragon paintings. You actually can't see them. They're just off the
Yep.
frame, but I've got a couple of the originals from Clementine. And one of them that is, I think, my favorite is the primeval worm, which is partly it's so evocative of this universe that I think Clementine created through Wyrmspan. And also I just really like the dragon powers. It eats eggs to go up on the Dragon Guild, and that's one of my
Hmm.
favorite parts of the game. But I would also say, like, if there was a plush, I would say get every single hatchling. Maybe I'd start with like the Savannah Dragonette. I think that one's particularly cute. It looks sort of like a baby cheetah with little wings.
Yes. Yeah.
That one's very, very cute.
I know. Yeah, because there were a couple cat themed dragons in
Yeah.
there because you're a cat mom, correct?
Yep. Well, so one of them was actually requested by Jamie to incorporate his cats.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I will admit that I did incorporate my cats into the dragon facts. And so if you read through the dragon facts, there's a Lady Pepper who is of course named after my cat Pepper. And then I have a Sir Connor who is named after my old cat Connor. So
Oh, nice.
and I know you're obviously an animal person, board game animal, and I also recall that you have a cat named Connie. Is that correct? The best
Y
cat name ever.
yes, and yeah, I was going to bring that up, and while it's not done yet, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure the intro to this video is going to be a joke that I'm making a call with Connie, and
Excellent.
my animals ask why because she lives here, and then yeah, you know. Um, yeah, that's actually a thing. I love to see anyone in the board game space who have pets and love their pets because for me, it's, we cover all games. We're just a in general board game channel, but I have a soft spot for pets,
Mhm.
obviously, and love to incorporate them in the video. So I love to see that when designers put those little touches in there, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think, it's one of these things. It's just a little bit silly. And our pets are an important part of our lives, especially even more so after COVID. But
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think how much better our life is for having. We have two cats at the moment,
Hmm.
having our silly little dorks in our lives.
Yeah, I could not agree more because we lost two cats of ours
Oh,
that
I'm sorry to hear it.
no, thank you, that my wife had for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And it was about the same time in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a lot of stuff,
Yep.
happening at once. And then since then, just because of our kids, we started with an emotional support dog for my
Mhm.
son, who is Harry, our kind of the mascot of our channel. And then we ended up finding Connie and Lefty, who both were also in need of rescue. And the funny thing was, my wife found them. And the minute she saw them, she was like, "Oh my God, they look exactly like our two cats, but kittens."
Yep.
And so
Yep.
it was kind of that perfect moment. And you're
Yep.
you're absolutely right. The joy and humor and stuff that they bring into our lives, it's, helps you get through the day sometimes, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, not to segue hard, but we're talking about themes. And this is something that I always like to do. I like going into the minutiae and these little silly details. And so maybe this is something you already know if you're curious about such things. And if not, this is fun to share. Uh, I've done this with other designers I've spoken with in the past. I like to look up your games on Board Game Geek and I like to go into a little statistics, right?
Mhm.
If you go into the game, if you go into the area where the mechanisms are, there's also categories or families according to Board Game Geek. So I'll click on a theme and then compare it to the giant database. And so for your two games, I said I want to see something. And for Wyrmspan,
Mhm.
do you know that aside from Gloomhaven and the Clank games, Wyrmspan is the highest rated game about dragons
Oh,
in the
interesting.
database?
I did not know that. Interesting. Okay, I'll
And
take it.
that was something I said I wanted to look it up and see because I'm like, oh, it has to be pretty high. It's high up in Board Game Geek. But when you think of something like dragons, you think they're everywhere in gaming. But I'm like, that is impressive because especially because Gloomhaven, it's like there's one in there. It's not
Right. It's not really, I wouldn't really consider it to be a dragon game,
not
but
at all.
yeah.
It's like Clank, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I'll take it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the games that are really heavy, kind of miniature focused games, and those tend to
Yes.
be a little bit lower rated.
Yeah.
Just because they don't have quite the same audience. And
Hmm.
there's something like Flamecraft,
Yeah.
which is, probably fairly highly rated as well. Vast features a dragon pretty prominently.
Yep.
But I can't think of too many games that are a little bit more in the Euro space that are really dragon forward.
Right. And that's what I think I kind of just made an assumption before I checked. I was like, well, there has to be a
Mhm.
thousand of them, but then it's like, oh no. And so I thought that was really cool. Like Wyrmspan, before you know it, it's going to be the highest dragon game on BGG. And then similar for Apiary, is Apiary is the second highest B game.
Oh,
Is
interesting.
Hive, which I don't even, Hive's an abstract strategy.
Yeah.
It's fun, but
But it has bees. It has
it has
bees.
bees. It has bees. But I thought that was cool too. So
Yeah, yeah, that's very cool.
yeah. So
Thank you for sharing that.
oh, absolutely. I like doing that. I'm like, let it be number one when I when I look it up. So yeah, that's just a little tidbit I wanted to share. One other thing that I did want to ask, because there with the whole Finspan announcement, with the
Mhm.
whole inevitable comparisons between the three and everything, an interesting comment I heard made about Finspan is that because it's lighter and because it is quite different, that was even harder to do because making a game simpler can have its own challenges.
Mhm.
When you started developing Wyrmspan, what was what were some of the biggest challenges as far as that comparison? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
obviously
absolutely.
Finspan doesn't exist yet, obviously from that perspective, but just that initial comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple of things I think really stood out. So, one of the things from the very beginning, this was from the very first draft, the sort of very first concept of Wyrmspan, was that we wanted there to be some kind of an explore mechanism.
Hmm.
If you think about dragons, it kind of digging deep into a tunnel. And locking in that explore mechanism ended up being one of the most challenging parts of the game. That for a really long time, you didn't have the player mats that you have in Wingspan and Wyrmspan and also Finspan that it was basically a free form, free flowing excavation. And so you were basically creating tunnels. And that was one of those things that I really liked conceptually, and I'd still like to come back to it at some point because I think digging out that kind of it's interesting. You can create your own paths, create your own adventure. But there were two problems with it. One was it was just really frustrating for players because you'd basically get locked out of resources. If you don't have the player mats, you don't have the very guaranteed access to specific types of resources.
Hmm.
And then it also just didn't feel like Wingspan. And I just remember bringing a version of it to Elizabeth a while, like fairly early on. I mean, maybe I'd been working out on it for 3 or 4 months, and she's like, "Connie, this is interesting, but it's just not Wingspan." And so I played around with it for quite a while after that, and then eventually, fairly late in the process, it was probably the final thing that kind of clicked into place with the game was, oh man, we really need those player mats because that's what really gives this game system its identity.
Yeah. I'm just trying to imagine like playing without that or having that free form element, and you're right, it would feel wildly different.
Yep, yep. And again, I think there's a very good game to be had there,
Yeah.
but not a game in this system. Because essentially what you did is you were sort of digging out tunnels and then you were putting the dragons into the tunnels, but you could build kind of every which way and you were doing different openings, which also just makes it a much more complicated game too, because there's a pretty big rule set associated with that. I mean,
Hmm.
where can your adventurer go? How do you prevent infinite loops? How do you track where you've been? Where do you go from one turn to the next? And there's just a lot of questions like that that would really, I think, have elevated the game complexity up a couple levels above where we wanted it as well.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah, it's interesting to me hearing that because I would have thought, and maybe I think a lot of people may have thought that element of the mat and having the three lanes and that's step one.
Yep,
That,
yep.
to make the similarities and then you start making differences. But what's funny about that is it couldn't feel more different, I
Yep.
think, from playing Wingspan, playing Wyrmspan. If you play them back to back, you're going to be like, even though this looks kind of the same on like just that layout,
Mhm.
that explore mechanism feels so different. Um, yeah, that is really interesting. And to jump over again on those differences with the guild
Mhm.
or the guilds, that's my favorite part of the
Yeah.
game, to be
Yeah, it's
honest.
it's great. I really like the guilds. They're
I,
great.
I I don't even know why it is, that rondelle kind of thing, moving around. It just feels so satisfying. It's one of the best parts of the game. It's like, yes, I get to move up on the guild.
Yep.
So I think that made a
Yeah.
big leap in the difference between them.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I'm a big don't hide it at all, but I really like one played powers. I really like combos and having kind of a bumpable like a guild track like that, adding that track and kind of the big benefits in the middle really kind of leaned into that. So you can play your cave card, which gives you an ability, which maybe lets you do something else, which then lets you bump up the guild track, which lets you play a dragon. And it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like can create these really satisfying combos. I know too. I mean, I just really like going up tracks. One game that I really like that I don't think gets enough love is Rise, and literally the whole game is just bumping up tracks. There's like 12 tracks or something like that, and that's all you do in the game is you ping off of tracks. It's great.
I could not agree more. I have said this in other videos of ours. I recently said how for us with we did our best Knizia games, and I love Through the Desert. It is a very classic, like pristine game, and it was one of the lowest on my ranked list. And I said, hold on, that's because they made Cascadero, which for me, even though it's wildly different as a game, for me it feels like Through the Desert with tracks. And I love go. There's nothing like
Yep.
going up those tracks. There's something about it.
Yep.
Even even some of the big Euros that's one element of. I'm like, nope, that's the part I'm focusing on.
Yeah.
There's something
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, something like Marrakesh, for instance, there's a couple of big tracks in the middle,
Yeah.
and I feel like I've never played the game without like really focusing on those tracks because, like, I don't know, as you said, tracks.
Hmm. And yeah, there's like even some Garfield games and stuff where I'll be playing it and I know I should be focusing on other things, but I'm like, but you see that combo there? If I do this, I'm going to move up that track, which is going to make me move up another one. So,
Yep. Yep.
so yeah, that is really cool. Now, I this next question comes with a grain of salt because obviously there's things you can't say, what have you. Where would you like to see either the Wyrmspan world go? Because obviously it's no secret there is expansions in development. Obviously you can't say anything about it, that's fine. But just in a general sense, what's the direction you'd like to see? And as a footnote to this, outside of Wyrmspan, just other designs or works of yours, what do you like to see on the horizon?
Well, that's a good question. And I mean, I do have several things in the works that unfortunately, as you mentioned, I can't really talk about. What, unfortunately, that's sort of the way of things.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd love to see with Wyrmspan is essentially just more of the universe. I think one of the things that I love the most about Wyrmspan is, I'm a big sci-fi fantasy nut.
Hmm.
And I really like the approach that Wyrmspan takes to dragons, the idea that they've sort of evolved to fill all of these ecological niches that other, that like mammals, for instance, have in our world. And you sort of set up the system with like the bickering dragon guilds and this real kind of exploration system. And so I'd really love to see kind of more of that world building. Um, and so I think, for me as a designer too, I just want to keep designing and I want to keep pushing myself to design different types of games too. One of my favorite designers is Vlaada Chvátil just because he designs everything. I
Hmm.
mean, from really, from code names to through the ages. I mean, it's just an incredible to Galaxy Trucker. I mean, it's just an incredible range. And so I certainly don't have that range, but I aspire to being able to sort of design different games in different parts of the hobby.
No, that's really cool. And you know what? I think that's a big attractor because some of the publishers and designers that are my favorites, kind of across the board, all have that variety because with some exceptions. But I think it's always impressive to look at something and say, "Wow, how is there that much variety in one place?" What
Yep.
like with Stonemaier, for instance. Some people we talked about it earlier, but why is it just a reskin of Wingspan? It's like, no, it's very different. But not to mention the fact that they have a dozen other games that are all wildly different. You know, not every company would have a game about making wine, collecting stamps, and then diesel punk 1920s and then space bees. And to me, that's an impressive variety. And the same goes for a designer. When you can design, these big games are like you said, some random small games, it's that diversity is impressive.
Well, I think there's something from a designer standpoint too that's really nice about some of the smaller games. The big games can take an awfully long time to iterate on. I mean, every time you go through the deck, you're like, all right, let's do
Yeah,
this. It's
yeah.
going to take me, several hours to go through and make these edits and double check everything. And there's something really nice about, hey, this game has 35 cards. Let's go, and you can iterate on it just so absolutely quickly.
Hmm.
But I also think there's something to be said too about it's very easy both as a designer, but also as a gamer, to kind of you play games with the same people, you play the same types of games, you kind of get into these habits. And so I think it's really nice to kind of push yourself to go in different directions and say, okay, well, maybe a fantasy realms type of game, maybe that's not my style of game. But if I was to make a game like that, what would I want it to be? What would it look like? Like, how do you combine kind of like a Euro sensibility with something that's a little bit more kind of wild and carefree?
Yeah, that's cool. Um, to your point, what you said, just to jump back to what you said a minute ago, I love that idea of growing the world of Wormspan because I liked that book that's in there with the facts about the dragons, which I know, again, some people are like, wait a minute, they're not real. I'm like, I wish they were. I wish I could know more about them.
I wish they were real too.
So yeah, I think that'd be really neat to just see that world explored in some way,
Yep.
because it's quite dynamic already.
Well, and it was really fun too. I mean, I wrote a lot of the Dragon Facts, but then I also had a lot of help with them as well. And just sort of seeing some of my gamer friends like really kind of embrace their creative side was it was a lot of fun. Just as sort of an activity. And so it's kind of, especially again in the kind of Euro games, it tends to be very regimented. And you're like, all right, how do I get the most points? What's a victory point worth? What's a turn worth? And so kind of like exploring that thematic side is wonderful.
Yeah. So yeah, I was wondering when it comes to family, friends, what's a memorable experience you've had with either of your games since they've been out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had a few, to be honest with you. I think one of the first ones was just going, I mean, this isn't even with family or friends, but just going to our local game store,
Sure.
Labyrinth in DC and just seeing it on the shelves. I mean, that was absolutely incredible. Um, I think playing my parents aren't really gamers. We grew up playing, Pinochle and Cribbage and games like that, but they're not really like Euro gamers. And just sitting down at the table with them to play apiary was pretty incredible. And so I really think it's that. And I'll also just kind of even branch out a little bit as well. This last August at Gen Con, just seeing how excited people were to meet me, not like as me personally, but especially as like a female designer in the industry was
Hmm.
really special. A woman came up to me and she had painted all of her fingernails, hand painted all of them to be different dragons from Wyrmspan, and it was just absolutely incredible. I mean, it's I love designing games, but I also love the fact that maybe now other women are like, hey, I can do this too. And so that was particularly special to me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that is something that should be championed, and I think, you being vocal for that and supportive of that is wonderful, and I think it does give people confidence, so that is a great thing. Now, kind of to that point, to bring things full circle, to bring things all the way back around to kind of what we talked about at the beginning. One of the key things I wanted to put in here, to maybe be of help or service to anyone who may be watching. What advice would you give to someone who's designing a game, whether it's the little idea, big idea, or they're designing something that is part of something already established? Maybe it's a small part, but whatever it
Yeah.
may be. What is some advice you'd give as far as how to get through it? Because, and I know
Yeah.
this is a huge question, but you've seen it, and there's a kind of a retrospective here looking back. What would you say is important to like keep in mind as they go through that process, knowing that there may be inevitable bumps or uncomfortable moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to take this question, but one thing I'll say is, and it's the thing that I'm the worst at, is develop a thick skin. Your game is not you. You are not your game. And so you really have to kind of separate your own identity and self-worth from the creation that you've made. And, because anytime if you're going to design a game, and this kind of goes into a more mechanical suggestion, but, get it to the table. It's it'll play out perfectly in your head, I promise. It will not play out the same way on the table. One of the most important things you can do is get it to the table, even if it's just 10 cards and a scribbled index card that tells you what to do with them. You know, it's going to be rough. No one comes out with a wonderful game on their first attempt. It's just not how it works. It's going to take dozens and dozens and dozens of iterations. Um, and so kind of developing that thick skin early on is really important. And then the last thing I'll say too is find the right tools, and software, digital tools for the types of games that you're making. I did a lot of apiary in Microsoft Word, which was a terrible idea. I burned an awful lot of time sliding objects around Word, and then when I finally got a program that does data merge that basically takes Excel sheets and turns them into, puts them into a template, I was like, oh my God, I had burned hundreds of hours of my life not doing that. And so I think anything you can do to reduce the barrier to iteration is going to put you in good stead to make a lot of progress in your games.
Well, I think that's some fantastic advice, and especially with the thick skin part, because you never know what's going to be coming out there, so it's good to develop that early. But I appreciate that. And thank you for all the sentiments today and for taking time to talk about all the ups and downs and the joys and how to endure the other parts. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, Connie.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was a blast. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Hope we can do it again sometime, maybe when the next game comes out.
Yeah, sounds good. And don't forget to play board games like an animal.